so many new pieces to this IU football team.
To me, that's going to set the tone on how you get ready for games on Saturday in the fall.
I would put that Indiana room up against anybody else in the conference, and that's something that we typically don't even come close to saying.
If you want to get total sickos committee about it, there's a position battle at long snapper too.
This is the Hoosier Huddle Podcast, part of the College Huddle Podcast Network.
Good morning and welcome to the Hoosier Huddle Podcast as we preview Indiana's home game against the Maryland Terrapins in the Big Ten home opener. That we don't forget that UCLA was the Big Ten opener. Indiana comes into the game at 4-0, 1-0, and receiving the second most votes of those not ranked in the top 25 in both the coaches and AP poll. Maryland comes in at 3-1, 0-1 in the conference. They come off a 38-20 win over Villanova. Their lone loss was a 27-24 loss to Michigan State at home. This is a very interesting team, but before we get into it, let's do a weather update. First, I want to, if you're a listener and you're living down south or in the path of this storm, like TJ, stay safe, follow warnings. Don't play a hero. Listen to what your emergency services are telling you and all that stuff. But yeah, it might affect Saturday's game. The forecast in Indianapolis looks like the worst of it is going to be on Friday. We'll see as the forecast is ever evolving. But it looks like at least a wet one. We'll see what the winds do. Right now, it's forecasted 10 to 15 miles an hour. TJ, how do you see this playing out, affecting the game? It might affect the crowd that's close to a sellout.
Yep. We've texted back and forth about this as a group and trying to figure out, okay, if the current forecast is what they get on Saturday, who does that advantage? We don't really know. I think both teams would prefer to have a dry track with very minimal wind. Maryland's got, Ty Felton is their best player. They want to be able to utilize his skills. Indiana has a deep wide receiver group, and Curtis Rourke is playing incredibly well right now. They would prefer to be able to throw the ball as well. So I'm not entirely sure which team would feel better about it. But on the surface, Indiana has run the ball better than Maryland has so far this season. It's not a massive advantage, and part of it is offset by Billy Edwards' mobility. Indiana fans will hopefully not remember, but trust us, it happened.
You're going to give Alex a heart attack, TJ.
I know. I'm trying to avoid, bringing it up, but Billy Edwards has a history of being able to run the ball against Indiana and other teams, but this is a much different Indiana coaching staff. I would not expect them to be unprepared for the ability that a quarterback is able to run the ball, as that coaching staff appeared to be that day. But I think that if it's 10 to 15 mile per hour winds, you can deal with that as a passing game. If it's a bit of a rain, you can deal with that as a passing game. You're probably going to dial it back some. If you get much windier than that, or if you've got real powerful gusts that are just unpredictable, at that point is where you turn into really becoming one-dimensional. And if it's a case where neither team feels comfortable throwing the ball more than 10 or 15 times, I think it's a slight advantage to Indiana, but it would be a real bummer. It's a game that on paper going into it looks like it's a really fun matchup. And if the weather dictates that it's just going to be a ground and pound game and who can hold on to a sloppy ball better, who knows? I mean, predictions go out the window at that case because you're looking at who makes more mistakes fumbling the ball when it's really wet and windy, and which offensive line is able to open up more holes for their running game. And that's something that's more difficult to predict.
Yeah, and since IU closed the stadium on both sides, it's more of a swirling wind than it was when both ends were open. I remember the 2006 Iowa game was super windy, and it affected games and kicks. I think where the wind could play a factor and the weather could play a factor is in the kicking game. IU is down. Looks like they're down both Derek McCormick and Alejandro Quintero. Quinn Warren has come in and done a nice job.
He did.
But here's the thing: for Maryland has given up 13 kickoff returns for an average of 22 and a half yards per return. Their opponents are only returning, Maryland themselves have only returned 4 kicks for 24 yards.
Right.
That, if the wind is blowing either north or south on one end of the field instead of east west, Miles Price and Solomon Van Horst could have an opportunity to make a difference. And this could be a game where a big kick return, whether it goes for a touchdown or you get into opponent's territory, really could play a difference. Same with the punt game. This is, I think you might be able to punt it high enough to get it, into that wind over the stadium a little bit. But, we've seen James Evans twice in the last month. There was the Rock Report put him on a milk carton. Have you seen this man? So, you trust him to do well. But yeah, that to me, special teams is could be a difference maker if the weather is super windy. And then, Indiana leads the nation in rushing touchdowns with 18. They have 4 capable backs. They have put the ball on the ground 3 times. Now, that could be an issue on Saturday, but they have not turned the ball over.
Right.
And that's, a lot of credit to Curtis Rourke. But there have been opportunities for opponents to get those takeaways. They just haven't been there. Maryland has forced 10 turnovers themselves. Are very aggressive towards the ball in the secondary.
Yep.
So they'll be raking at the ball and stuff like that. But it's a matchup, TJ, that has been wild since 2014 when Maryland came into the conference. You saw 2015 IU went down 21-3, ended up blowing Maryland out. And then it looked like a whole bunch of one score games. You have 2017 Maryland has a big comeback, wins by 5 or 6 points, and then just recently you had some blowout. Last year was a blowout, but every game has been close, and maybe that's a Tom Allen and previous staff stuff. But what gives me a little bit of confidence is that Kirk Cignetti has a lot of leeway in his game plans to say, hey, this is what the weather might be. This is our plan going forward. We could change it if it happens to not come to fruition and things like that. And, I don't think Maryland's scheme is difficult to defend anyway. But I don't think it's going to be like last year where you have guys running wide open down the field the first play of the game and people looking around like, I don't know what I'm doing.
We've certainly not been given any indication that that's going to be the case. Looking at their offensive skill players, Jayshon Jones, of course, gone. Ty Felton has stepped up in a big way.
Huge way. 41 receptions.
Yeah.
The next leading receiver has 21. Nobody else has more than 9. He
5
is
touchdowns.
the 5 touchdowns, I think over 600 yards.
Yep.
He is the go-to guy, and he's been the go-to guy since week 1.
Yeah.
People know they're going to throw him the ball. It's kind of like when you're playing LeBron in basketball. Here's your choice. Do you let LeBron get his and you let somebody else beat you, or do you shut down LeBron and let Chris Bosh or Dwayne Wade beat you? That's the choice that Indiana's defense is going to have to make.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that in that analogy, Maryland probably doesn't have a Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh. Caden Prather is good. Um, he's not an all Big Ten caliber receiver, in my opinion. Could prove me wrong there, but they certainly don't have a third target. So they've got I would say, a good second target in Caden Prather, and then a big drop off. Nobody else with double-digit catches for the Terrapins. Their third guy is tight end, Dylan Wade. So I think that looking at Indiana's secondary, what do you do with D'Angelo Pons? Is it a case where if Ty Felton moves around from field to boundary, you don't match up and say, okay, Pons, you follow him everywhere? Is it a case where, all right, Jameer Johnson, he's on your side, you've got him. Or Jamari Sharp, he's on your side, you've got him. And Pons takes, maybe it's Prather goes onto his side. Or do you say, okay, Pons, you're matched up with their best guy, that's Felton. You're matched up with him. You follow him wherever he lines up. That's your assignment. We're going to see. Indiana has not faced a alpha receiver yet this season, so it's going to be a first for us to see. D'Angelo Pons versus Ty Felton, how Indiana's coaching staff decides to defend that, and then how D'Angelo Pons does in that matchup. Felton is much bigger. He's listed at 6'2", which means he's probably 6 foot or 6'1". But he's pretty physically imposing. He's strong, and it's a much bigger target than what D'Angelo Pons typically went against in the Sun Belt. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out. And the best way to help your secondary in a matchup like that is your pass rush. If you can knock Billy Edwards off of his preferred spot, get him off of his first read, which is going to be Felton most of the time, you feel good about your chances at that point.
Yeah, and I would put Jalen Walker in as a spy. He is super athletic. If you watch the Charlotte game, there was a pass breakup where he just, from standing still, jumping, looked like he jumped over like the height of the regular guys. It looked like he's on the freaks too. Yeah, he's on the freaks list for a reason, by Bruce Feldman. But it's how much faith do you have in Jameer Johnson? Are you really going to run D'Angelo Pons all over the place? I think you try it, and you test.
See how it goes.
If it doesn't work, then they're going to move Ty Felton out. But this is a matchup that both guys probably want. If you're a number one receiver, number one DB, you're looking over there going, "Yep, I want this guy." So that's the mentality that has to go into it. Billy, you got to get the pass rush. Indiana has been good in the pass rush, but tackling has to be better than last week.
Yes. Yeah. And looking at the other side of the ball, I mean, Maryland's weakness is that secondary. Now they've played 4 opponents. 2 of them are major conference, and you can try to learn something from those. Michigan State was a loss, and Aiden Childs really threw it all over them. A couple of turnovers from Michigan State kept that game closer than it would have been otherwise. And then Anthony Calandria, and the Virginia Cavaliers. I've watched a lot of Virginia over the past season and a half. That offense is hit or miss. Calandria is not, in my opinion, even close to the quality of quarterback that Curtis Rourke is. And Virginia only scored 13, but they had multiple chances in the red zone that they were unable to cash in on. So Virginia gets into the red zone, settles for field goals, only ends up with 13 points and loses that game by 14. It looks like a lopsided game, but if Virginia cashes in on those red zone opportunities, they're in a much better position to either win that game or be right there at the end of it.
That's what Indiana has done well. We wrote about it this week, is the red zone success. Now, the red zone defense hasn't had many shots, but the opponents are scoring 100% of the time there.
And I was mentioning Maryland's weakness on defense is that secondary.
Yep.
Yes, they're aggressive. They can force turnovers. It's important to take care of the ball, especially if you've got any weather difficulties. But they can be had. Aiden Childs threw all over them, made a couple mistakes, but had a big day. Anthony Calandria, I think, is incredibly average. Curtis Rourke, much more of a veteran, smarter player, and also just a more accurate passer. Indiana's wide receiver core much better than Virginia's. And Virginia moved the ball on them, but then failed in the red zone. So you're looking at, if the weather cooperates, it could be another big day for IU's passing game. You do have to have that balance, of course, especially if the weather's not going to cooperate. The Terrapins giving up 3.31 yards a carry. I don't think that they're, my opinion, I'm not terribly impressed by their defensive front. I think it's better than their secondary, but I don't think it's amazing.
They lost a couple playmakers. Barham went to Michigan.
Well, that's the big one.
And then, they were so good at getting after the quarterback last year.
Right.
And they've just taken a dip down to the bottom of the Big Ten.
7 sacks in 4 games.
Yeah.
And that's including one against UConn, a game against UConn that they won easily. And then a game against Villanova that, to be fair here, if Indiana has that score, we would be pointing out a lot of Villanova's points came in the second half. True. Yeah. Okay. But Villanova's not a good FCS team. They're fine. They're better than Western Illinois, certainly.
Everybody's better than Western Illinois.
Yeah. It's a low bar to clear, but it's not like they were playing a team that is in the FCS top 5 here. So I don't think you learn a whole lot about that. So you look at, okay, what did they do pressure-wise against Michigan State? That's a pretty good comp, yes. They didn't really get much of any on Aiden Childs, and he was able to pick them apart. So I think it should be a pretty good day for Indiana's offense, unless you're dealing with severe adverse weather conditions. And at that point, you just kind of take away the stats and hope that Indiana can effectively handle the weather.
That might be in the passing game, a breakout game from Donovan McCulley and E.J. Williams. They're both taller guys that you could just, go 10 yards downfield, turn around, and box your guy out and make the play that way. McCulley has not gotten into a rhythm. He must have missed a ton. He had the one catch was almost impossible, but there was a play he's wide open. It just, I don't know if he took the wrong route or whatever, but the throw was a little overthrown. Should have had a touchdown there, but he has not been on the field. And knowing Kirk Cignetti's philosophy, you're going to have to earn your way onto the field.
Sure.
And right now, he hasn't earned his way onto the field, it seems. But this could be a game where, McCulley and E.J. Williams are both bigger body people. Hey, 10 yards, turn back. We'll throw you the ball and just box out your guy and make the catch.
Well, and I think another way that an offense, and I thought we would have seen more of this, but maybe they're saving it. Indiana really hasn't needed to do this. Plus, wide receiver is such a strength. I expect if there's some choppy conditions with the weather, but Indiana still wants to pass the ball, I would expect to see maybe the running backs get a little bit more involved in the short passing game. Haven't really seen much of it at all.
That's where Solomon, Van Horst, Kalon Black.
Yeah, if
they
I'm
have
not
a
mistaken,
couple guys.
Van Horst has a catch. Let me look that up. Van Horst has one catch.
But that was out of the
has
slot.
One catch. Ellison has a catch for 19. That's it. So 3 catches between the whole running back group. And it's something that we know they're capable of doing. So, if you've got high winds or, heavy rain and you want to still throw the ball, extend out use it as an extension of the running game, you could see some halfback pass work Using bigger targets like McCauley, like E.J. Williams. Elijah
Surratt.
Surratt, of course, would be a prime candidate for that. It might hurt guys like a Miles Price that rely more on short area quickness if the turf is real wet and soggy and slippery. So a lot of different variables that we're not going to know how it's going to play out until you see exactly what the weather conditions are. And you're not going to know that until, probably late Friday when you see exactly what that storm path is once it gets on land.
Yeah, it's supposed
How
to
quick it
rain.
moves.
Yeah, and I don't know how well the IU turf field drains, but you're looking at a forecast of multiple inches of rain in Bloomington on Friday and near a half an inch of rain on Saturday. It's how does that field drain? How slippery does it get? We saw against Virginia, and I don't think it's going to be a deluge like that on Saturday.
No.
But we saw the field puddles up and things like that. So, we'll see. The weather's going to play a big factor. TJ, what's your main key to a Hoosier win on Saturday?
Yeah, I think we're going to operate under the assumption that the forecast as it currently is correct. It's not terrible wind, it's not terrible rain, but it's also not going to be a pleasant day. So I think we're going to operate under that assumption. And given that, I'm going to go with turnovers. I think that in a competitive game, which this certainly should be, if you're looking for a comparison point, Maryland's better than UCLA. So I think that using that as a comparison point, this is a matchup opponent. It's that second swing game on the schedule. And in that type of game, if Indiana can continue to win the turnover battle as they have done so far, continue to take care of the ball while still being aggressive on offense, it's not like they're just sitting back and just trying not to lose. They're being aggressive and still taking care of the ball. So if Indiana can continue to do that and win that turnover battle by 2 or more, you're going to feel great about your opportunity to move to 5-0.
Yeah, I'm going to take the special teams route on this, especially if we're going under the assumption that it's going to be wet with a slight wind. If Maryland does give up, some kickoff opportunities, kick return opportunities, we saw what Miles Price could do in the punt return game. We've seen what Solomon Van Horst could do in the kick return game. That those hidden yards that I love to talk about, those hidden yards are going to be huge. That's the difference between an extra first down, a field goal or touchdown on a lot of drives where it could be, just a wet track that you're not going to get many opportunities to score. And it's the difference between maybe James Evans downing a punt inside the 10 or, and this is where I really wish we knew what Nico Radicic's his range was. Because he's going to be put to the test today on Saturday with field goals. Now, hopefully, IU doesn't need to kick field goals, but it's something to keep an eye on that and how Quinn Warren handles kickoffs because he's been pretty good at them, putting them in the end zone and limiting returns. But if there's a big wind in one direction, one team's going to have a handful of returns. Should there be opportunities?
Right. Yeah. I think that's very true. Another area that was briefly mentioned, but I think will play a key role as you try and limit explosive plays in what could be a lower scoring game than expected if the weather's bad. Open field tackling needs to be on point.
Yep.
It was really good until the Charlotte game. And the Charlotte game definitely in the run game was iffy for large chunks of that contest. The defense buckled down in the second half for sure, but they still gave up quite a bit on the ground that is concerning as you move into schedule with more physical able teams. Let's say that Maryland tosses a short pass because that's what you have to do to get the ball to a Felton or to a Prather and still have them involved in the game, even when you can't throw downfield real easily. You've got to get them down for 5 or 6 instead of letting them break a couple tackles and turn 5 or 6 into 50 or 60.
Maryland has 18 plays total over 20 yards. 15 of them are in the passing game.
Yep.
So that just tells you how much they rely on that passing game and how just unexplosive that running game has been so far this season.
Right. Roman Himby, capable running back, but I think it's fair to say that based on the work he did early in his career, a bit of a disappointment that he has not, gotten a lot better looks on paper. And a lot of that probably has to do with the running offensive line just not being as good as the Terps were there in the past couple of seasons. I think that's a fair statement. So turning to predictions, again, all this goes out the window if the weather is significantly different than what we anticipate it being. I can't help but love the overall culture that Curt Cignetti appears to have already implemented within this team, the business-like approach that they have taken to each and every game. I don't think they're going to be thrown off by whatever the weather throws at them. They're going to be ready. They're going to be prepared to play. And I'll take Curt Cignetti over Mike Locksley anytime I can get that matchup. That's not a criticism of Mike Locksley. I think he gets an unfair rap as just an accumulator of talent that can't put together a good product. I don't think that's accurate at all. I think it could have been earlier in his career, but I think he's improved quite a bit from an outsider's standpoint. But I'm so impressed by what Indiana's coaching staff has been able to do just in the 4 games that we've seen them. So I'm going to go with Indiana to win this game. I do think it's going to be lower scoring than otherwise it would be, but I'll take IU to win it 28-21 Hoosiers.
Yeah, it's again, a lot is going to depend on the weather. I do agree with you that IU has the advantage on the coaching end. They have the advantage on the offensive line and in the running game. Where it gets dicey is how do you defend Ty Felton, and the tackling is a concern after last week. You cannot slip and miss tackles and let Maryland run all over the field. But I do think at home it's going to be a largely IU crowd. Maryland does not travel well.
Especially when the weather's like this.
So, I use about 4,000 tickets from a sellout. We'll see how many of those 48,000 show up, but it'll be, of those people who show up, will probably be a 97% pro IU crowd to fire up this team. Going to 5-0 is huge. I think the focus on this team is laser-like. I'm going to take IU 27, Maryland 17.
Yeah, and I think the Charlotte game played out kind of similar to what we would have expected. Maybe a little surprised Charlotte ran the ball the way that they could, but them scoring 14
Charlotte
points
would hang around in the first quarter, second quarter, and then IU would have their way with them. So look, people panicked in the first half. But IU pulled away, and it was another dominant win Coach Cignetti probably loved the fact that there was a ton of stuff to work on.
Yeah, and even the panic was isolated to one area of the game. It was the run defense, because the offense for Indiana kept on clicking. I mean, it's the amazing 180-degree turnaround that Mike Shanahan and this entire offensive staff, including Bob Bostad,
It's Curt Cignetti's offense. He'll make sure to tell you that.
including Kirk Cignetti, and everybody involved on the offense, anybody that has had any input whatsoever, thank you. Because it is so much better and so much more enjoyable to watch an offense that gets the ball and you actually have confidence. Hey, they can probably score. That's so nice, as opposed to, man, if we give up a couple of touchdowns, which we know we will, we're not going to win this game.
One touchdown.
True. Yeah, that's true. It's just a night and day difference. And even when Indiana's defense was struggling in that first half to stop the run, I never felt remotely panicked about the actual outcome of the game because I knew our offense could score when they needed to.
Yeah.
And that's a really good feeling to have. I'm hoping that the weather does not overwhelm this game against Maryland because I still have that same feeling that IU's offense can score when they need to. As long as Mother Nature does not interfere. I've seen all the jokes. Indiana football, chance to go to 5-0, huge home game. Here, have a hurricane. I know. It's not wrong. It's not wrong. What are you going to do? Kurt Cignetti, I feel like, is going to do that. He's going to shrug his shoulders, have the team ready to play, and that's what they're going to do. In a parking lot, in a hurricane, in the Rose Bowl, wherever.
He just wants to kick people's butts.
Yeah. They're going to take care of business, and that's what we're both predicting. So, fascinating game, all kinds of variables and storylines to see play out. Let's see. I mean, it's a huge opportunity to go to 5-0, probably get in the top 25, and then head to Northwestern with the chance to become bowl eligible in the first weekend of October. Remarkable.
Yeah, you have a lot of boxes to check starting this week with another toss-up game, and hopefully the fan base turns out. It's not supposed to be cold; it's supposed to be warm and wet, which should be okay. But we'll see how the pregame goes. As always, Upstairs is running their breakfast club. It starts at 7 a.m. The first 200 first 200 people. You don't have to be a student to go. The first 200 people get breakfast and a T-shirt. It is presented by Hoop Tea this week, so make sure you stop by. Get your refreshments at Upstairs and then head to Memorial Stadium for the noon kickoff on Big Ten Network. You can follow all our stories on HoosierHuddle.com. We have our matchup to watch that TJ wrote earlier, our keys to the game that I put out today, and multiple stories on players Miles Price and Keyshawn Williams, along with an analysis of our of IU's red zone offense. Then you can follow us on Twitter at Hoosier_Huddle, and like, rate, subscribe to YouTube and our podcast.
Yep. Have a good week, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. If you're in the path of the hurricane, please use precaution and be safe.